encourage you if that makes you comfortable. So what we have today is Sentencing Worksheets 101, which is it can be kind of difficult because the tough thing about the electronic worksheet system is that you really have to have an active case to really understand how it's actually working. But I don't feel comfortable putting somebody up as a training option because it wouldn't allow us to record it and everything. And I want you to see as much as possible of actual. So I'm sorry to say that although this will be a really good training, it is going to be a lot of screenshots, but I think those will be very helpful when you get back into the system of remembering everything that goes with each page of the electronic worksheet system. So as we always say, there's no such thing as the current guidelines. I've been saying this for 25 years this coming April. Yay for Linda. So a quarter of a century's worth of no such thing as current guidelines. Because when we use the term the current guidelines, we're not looking at the date on the calendar. We're actually looking at the date, the current offense that we're working on when that occurred. And that then dictates the guidelines policy manual that we will be looking at. Those go into effect each year on August 1st and are in effect through July 31st of the following year. So oftentimes when you will call and you will say, I had an offense that happened in 2022, we're going to ask you before or after August. The only change there would be in 2021 when they went into effect on September 15th, but they did remain in effect till July 31st of the following year. So it's just really important to always know which guidelines you're working in because there are changes every year, and you want to make sure that you're capturing the changes that are in effect when the current offense occurred as they relate to things like severity levels, mandatory minimums, the presumptive sentence. Sometimes which grid to use can change when the new grids come into effect. So by using that date of the current offense as your North Star, you will be good. And that was always the case up until 2019. But in 2019, the commission made a lot of changes to the guidelines to criminal history calculation. Somebody appealed their sentence, a guy named Robinette appealed his sentence, and Mr. Robinette won on appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court to say that, hey, I was still pending sentencing in 2019 when those changes went into effect. So technically, I should get to take advantage of them. And that's something called the amelioration doctrine. It's a legal thing. The legislature has more control over it. The guidelines have no control over the amelioration doctrine, which means all of those changes that went into effect on 2019 are now in effect regardless of the date of the current offense. So we are not really requiring that you use two manuals. Here's what we're saying. If you have an offense that occurred on or before July 31st of 2020, all the way back to May of 1980, use the 2019 manual. We did not go in and redo all of the manuals to make the policy changes in each one of those 40 years before we had these changes. So up until July 31st of 2020, you can use the 2019 manual. And from there, you can just pick it up and use the manual in effect. So if your offense date was on August 15th of 2020, you could use the 2020 manual. So there's no reason after 2019 to worry about which book you're using. It's only when you have an offense before 2019 that you want to make sure that you're also checking on what those criminal history policies are that changed in 2019. And we do have all of those available on our website, which is mn.gov/sentencing guidelines. The guidelines got dropped, but I think that's an easy thing to remember. And hopefully you have it bookmarked, so it's not even an issue. But on our website, we have, oh, I see what happened to it. It dropped down. It's covering up that thing I'm trying to show you, which says the guidelines. Gotta love technology. So you click that, and then you select Sentencing Guidelines Archives, and then we have them on the drop down all the way back to May of 1980. So no matter how old your offense is, there's always a guidelines option available for you on this website. So you don't have to worry about having them printed out in your office anymore. We did have another change that took place in 2023, and that was the change in sentence durations that are cataloged in statute 609.02, where it outlines what the sentence duration is that makes each offense that level. So what makes a felony, a gross, etc. So if the offense was sentenced before July 1st of 2023, we still maintain that 366 days and 365 days maximum for those gross misdemeanors. So whenever you see a prior offense that received 365 days, double check that sentencing date. Because if it was before 2023, it's a gross misdemeanor. But if it was after July 1st of 2023, it was a felony. So we don't want to look at the current offense date. We want to look at the date that the prior offense was sentenced so that we can point to the duration in effect at that time. And one thing that the commission did, and I do think it makes it a little bit easier because this policy did not change when the sentence structure changed. When you have an out-of-state offense, it is still required to have a minimum 366 days to be a felony, so the year and a day. So that makes everybody that got 365 days as a felony sentence in another state, that's still a gross misdemeanor here. So we have a lot of dates that we have to keep track of. But I think the thing that is helpful when you're thinking about all of the policies related to the current offense, those are the guidelines in effect when the current offense occurred. But when we're looking at priors, we are including in priors everything that received an imposed sentence or stay of imposition prior to sentencing on the current offense, which means we're not concerned with offense dates. So we can look at the sentencing date of that prior offense and decide based on that where it goes in criminal history, even after that change went into effect. When you're ready to access the electronic worksheet system, we have a web address for that, and you go into the portal through the Department of Corrections. And I want to say that I appreciate that some of you, I recognize the names on here of some of you. You've been doing this a long time, but we may have some folks that aren't familiar. So we're just starting from the beginning on Worksheets 101. So we're going to access the electronic worksheet system, which is housed on the Department of Corrections portal, where you go in to find, any information related to the offender, ways that you can search for other agents, other information that comes up on the portal. We're in there too. So you only need that single user ID and login to access the system. When you have any technical issues related to the system, like your password is expired or it keeps kicking you off the system for some reason, do reach out to the Department of Corrections through that email link that they have down there at the bottom of the screen. But try to avoid sending them your guidelines questions. As the pages go through, the sentencing guidelines email does come up. So if you have questions as you're in the system, you can actually reach out to us immediately from that page with your question. But try to avoid sending those to DOC because it has to go through the whole big, it has to go through a lot before it gets to us, and it may take a couple of days to get your answer versus, less than an hour, hopefully. So when you get to the main page of the portal, there are websites, there are messages on there that may or may not pertain to you depending on why you've gone in. But what you're looking for here is over to the left. You see that option that says under MSGC, Electronic Worksheet System. Click on that, and that is going to open up that small box that you see there on the bottom right called the Electronic Worksheet System. And the first page that pops up is called Search Worksheets. So this is where you can begin the process of either finding a worksheet that you've already started. You can do that either through the name or through the case number and using the search worksheets. But I think usually when we're coming here, we're looking at adding a worksheet. So we click on Add Worksheets, and that takes us to the Begin Worksheet screen. Now, most of the data underneath agency should be pre-populated with your information. But if it is missing, there is a way to manually enter it. Feel free to do that. Maybe you're changing the worksheet that someone else started. Your name should be in that agent drop down that you see there. You can see where it says training, MSGC. This is our training user ID that we use, so the system looks like you use it instead of how we use it, which would be way too confusing. But you can change the agent name there, but if for some reason the information is not coming up, you can manually enter the agent name, but it is going to tell you to contact your CSTS administrator because that's where statewide the portal pulls the information from. So you want to make sure that that's up to date. And the other thing that exists under the agency box, which is not a required field, but that is the expected sentencing date. And I will let you in on a little secret. That is how we prioritize worksheet review. So when we go back, like I've been off, I'll be off for about an hour and a half doing this. There will probably be 30 worksheets when I go back. I will prioritize them by sentencing date because the assumption is these are the ones that need to be dealt with first. So put a date in there. Even if you're doing a pre-plea worksheet, you can put a date in the future. It's not going to print out on the worksheet. It's more of a way to help you get your worksheet pushed through faster if necessary. Down under the court case section, this is probably this is the best function that this system has. And when people don't use it and when people enter the information manually, it can be frustrating because then you're not capturing the information that is found on MinSys or MGA. I'm not sure if it's still pulled from MinSys, but it's pulled in from one of the court management systems. And it's going to pull in all of the data related to the current offense, including the conviction plea date, including the name, the defendant, and birth date that the defendant is being sentenced under, which is really important because that's the information when we go and we pull sentences from court data and are trying to match them up. That's what we're looking for is the name, the date of birth, the plea date that that defendant was sentenced under. And if it is different, we have to go in and change it. And that honestly gets kind of frustrating because the get court case function is available to you regardless of what kind of worksheet you're doing, whether you're doing a completed worksheet, a pre-plea, or that fantastically seldom used but very great criminal history summary. The get court case function is going to pull in exactly what is needed for this particular case being sentenced. So the different kinds of options that you have now under that between pre-plea, criminal history summary, and then the conviction plea date. The pre-plea is, of course, the great option that we've always had when you have a single count and they've ordered a pre-plea worksheet, or if there are multiple counts or case numbers that each have a different offense date. So there's no question involved about single versus separate courses of conduct, lesser included, things like that. It's very clear what happened when, and therefore you can do a pre-plea worksheet on all of them. And that allows you to reflect all of the necessary Hernandizing and things like that. But that's not always a good option to provide to the parties that are oftentimes just wanting to know what the criminal history score is so that they can start to pull together a plea agreement or a discussion between the parties. And that is where I have to tell you that the criminal history summary, which we call the CHS, comes in handy. That is fantastic when there are multiple counts. Happened on the same day. It was maybe a single course of conduct with multiple victims. It was, involving a burglary or a kidnapping or a meth offense, or just a bunch of offenses where it's really unclear what the court will actually sentence on. When you offer the parties a criminal history summary, what you are doing with that is entering the worksheet in reverse order. So you're starting with the criminal history and you're providing them a number that they can then jump off with each of the different offenses, with determining which one they're actually going to sentence on. And then once that's all figured out, you can take that criminal history summary and turn it into a worksheet in no time flat. I'm going to say under a minute, but I'd say it's closer to 30 seconds because at that point, all you have to do is go in and add the offense that they're sentencing. And then the sentence will populate and everybody will have a completed worksheet. But you will have a completed worksheet that you didn't have to stress out about in trying to figure out. And let me tell you, I just spent some time with another agency earlier, a little bit last week, and then this week. The fights that were going on was indescribable. And all of it would have been solved with a criminal history summary. So I cannot stress enough how great that is. And we can talk about that offline if you want to see whether or not it works for your case. But even if the person has no criminal history, it is not your responsibility to decide what offenses will be sentenced rather. So in giving the court a criminal history summary or the parties, you're actually doing a great service to them so that they can then turn around and tell you, okay, now you want to do worksheet or worksheets for these offenses. So I will stop with that. I very much enjoy the criminal history summary. I love to talk about it. We can have a whole training on that if you want to. The conviction plea date is going to auto-populate when you use the get court case. And that's the date we want to use. And every month we go through and change anywhere from 20 to 30 conviction plea dates to change them from the manually entered date to the actual date of the conviction or the plea. And so please, please, please use the get court case. It's your best friend within the worksheet. It will lead you, it will not lead you astray. When you use the get court case, it gives you this information. So in this case, we just have a single count. But if there were multiple counts, you would be able to select from the drop-down box which count you wanted to sentence first. And so it would pull this in. If this is the information that you want, you can say okay. We know that sometimes the information on MNCIS can be incorrect. Go ahead and use the get court case and then update it, because it may still pull in good information like the offense date and the conviction date. And then maybe you just have to change the particular offense. That's okay. That's really easy. If you're good, you can click OK. If you need to go back and enter something differently or make a different choice, you just click cancel. Cancel is your best friend. Cancel gets you off the page and you start over. So after you use the get court case, your information is returned on the defendant, including the name and the date of birth. The SID number may populate if there is one available. If there is not, that can certainly manually be entered. So the only thing you have to do at this point before you can proceed is add in the gender, the race, and the ethnicity. And we have very limited race options. We know that. That's part of what we're working on, is updating those to sort of match more of what the census makes available for race data. So the one thing that we ask of you is to not use other or unknown for the race unless you will be entering Hispanic as the ethnicity. So when you use other or unknown and you try to use unknown or non-Hispanic in the ethnicity, you will get an error message. So you do want to try to catch that before that happens. After you enter that data, you do save and go to add offense. So your two options here, save and go to add offense or save and go to tree. Each one does different things. I will show you what each one of those looks like after you push them. So if you clicked save and go to tree, it's going to take you back to the worksheet tree without this information included. So all you're going to get on it is that information up there where it says status and offender and the court case number, but it's not going to have any of the information that you need for the current offense. But I wanted to show you this here because this becomes more of your navigation screen once you are to the point where you can continue on. This is where you navigate from. So each of the pencil icons takes you to the different page. Each of the trash can icons deletes that information. Be really, really careful when you use the case number box to delete because it will delete everything, as opposed to maybe you just need to delete the offense and re-enter it. We know that that happens. You make the worksheet for one thing, you have to change it to another. That trash can up there underneath the blue bar that says Electronic Worksheet System, that says status, and it says open, and there's a trash can. That is the trash can that will get rid of the entire worksheet. So if you have those stays of adjudication that are successfully completed, you can delete them. If you have someone that was a felony, you thought it was a felony, but they're convicted of a gross misdemeanor, you can delete the worksheet. So that's a really good option to use, and it is available for you to use. You don't have to go through MSGC anymore to get that done. If, however, we click the add and save and go to add offense, this is what would come up. And this is probably what you're most familiar with as you move through the screens. And this is the add offense page. When you use the get court case function, the count number that is hopefully the correct one, because I have to tell you that is something that we also change a lot. Not everyone is sentenced on count number 1. The count number that you selected when you use get court case will populate with the conviction statute. That does not also autofill the penalty statute. That has to be manually entered, but a penalty statute is not always necessary. Some offenses have both the conviction offense definition and the penalty statute included in the conviction offense on its own. There is no penalty. But that will help make certain when you have the penalty, when it's available, to make certain that the severity level is added correctly. The severity level will auto-populate in some cases, but in this situation that we see on this page for this theft, it can't auto-populate because there are so many different ways that theft can transpire that we don't know what it is. And since the system does not read the penalty statute, this is a time when putting in the penalty statute would be a good idea to help us figure out why the severity level was selected as it was. However, it will auto-populate if that information is available. And if it is, just verify that it is correct, because sometimes we're all human, we all make mistakes, and the data that we entered might have been incorrect. And we don't know about that until somebody tries to enter the offense. So it can sometimes take a while for us to figure that out, that it was wrong. After the severity level, there are a couple of options. I'm going to drop down, though, right now to custody because I want to do a separate conversation about the weapon and the conditional release. Custody is going to be a drop down here, but all you're doing here is assigning the status type. You still have to go into the individual prior offense and indicate if that's the offense custody was for, so that the point will calculate correctly, because it will default to a half a point. And if there is no prior selected or no other option exercise to change it from a half a point to a full point, it will remain at a half a point. It will, got to turn my phone down, sorry about that. So it will remain at a half a point, and that may end up being an error that has to be dealt with later on. After you enter everything that you need on this screen, there will be a button that says continue. That will populate the modifiers. You always want to select the modifiers on this screen, not just by adding the statute number, like on the additional statute lines, because adding the modifier here is a signal to the sentencing calculator that something might need to be modified. A couple more things that will happen on this add offense page. Depending on what the offense is that you enter, you might get the repeat severe violent offense comment. So this is a pop-up comment when you enter an offense that is found in section 8, the severe violent offense list. What this is telling you is that, hey, this current offense is a severe violent offense. If there are priors that also fit in that definition from 2G13 that are also found in section 8 of the guidelines, you may need to add in the modifier for this repeat severe violent offender. And it gives you the options of 1, 2, or 3 priors that will add the specific amount of time required for those numbers of priors. But just like the other message that will pop up for first-degree drug offenses, what that is telling you is, hey, we're flagging this for you, but it may not amount to anything. If you don't have any prior criminal history that fits in the severe violent offense list, then you can ignore the list, the comment. If you don't have a first-degree drug offense with a specific penalty under 152.021 parent C, you can ignore the message. But it is prompting you to do something on this page, and the something it's prompting you to do is found in the modifiers box from that drop down. So that's an important thing. I'm trying to hit on some of the things that we return for modification because of errors, and either assuming that you have to enter the modifier or you have a need for the modifier but don't enter it is a reason why we return a lot of worksheets. So I wanted to point that out to you. The other thing that will come up on this page is in regard to weapons. You'll get a message that says, one of two messages. This message says this is an eligible weapons offense. Eligible being the key term here. That means that the offense that has been selected is found in 60911 subdivision 9. And if there is a finding of fact on the record that the weapon was an element of the crime, the weapon can be added. Now, just because 60911 is cited, just because they say in the complaint that he had a weapon, the finding of fact is made when it is included in the conviction offense. We're going to look at what those look like on the next page. So here we're really concentrating on B and C, and that is, do they plead to the weapon, either on the petition to enter a guilty plea, or if they make a statement, I think it's an allocution statement, then the weapon is present, or if there is a finding by the court or the jury in a separate question, did this offense involve the use of a weapon? Yes or no? So unless that finding of fact is made on the weapon, it cannot be indicated in this situation. But in this situation, this is a weapon offense. So we have a very solid, yep, this guy is not only in 60911, but it is also an automatic. And when we say automatic, what we mean is by virtue of the fact that you are convicted of these offenses, you are convicted of the weapon. 609.11 doesn't even have to be cited. The weapon is there through the conviction offense. Is it helpful to have a weapon cited? Absolutely. For drug offenses, for assault in the second degree, and for harassment. But for drive-by shooting, certain persons not to have firearm, and the first and second degree drug offenses, those are all firearm related. So as long as it just says firearm, that's probably okay. But actually, if it doesn't say anything about the weapon is automatic, which means you have to put it here, because if you try to go past this page without adding the weapon here, it will prevent you from doing so. The message that says this is an eligible weapons offense, you can leave that blank and move on. But this one is the hard stop. So you've got to make certain that you get that weapon on there. And that includes if the prosecutor is waiving 609.11 and they're saying, okay, we're not going to sentence with regard to the weapon. That's fine, but that is a departure. And so, because the weapon must be included. So we know sometimes they will say, well, they amended the assault second degree complaint to not include the weapon. Doesn't work like that. I just had one this morning where it was an assault second degree pled down to an assault third degree. And I thought, well, there shouldn't be a weapon marked in that. And I went and investigated. And in fact, the weapon was in the plea petition. Pled guilty to third degree assault while using a dangerous weapon. That was the plea. And so then we can include it. But again, even if the prosecutor says, yeah, we're not going to sentence that way, take it off, you can't remove that weapon from these offenses. And then finally, the last box that we have on here that takes manual entry is conditional release. Now, if it's conditional release for DWI, that is a 5-year conditional release period, regardless of whether it's their first or subsequent. So we actually auto-populate that 5 years. So you don't have to worry about that with DWI, but you will have to worry about it with the other eligible offenses. The CSC offenses are the only ones that are really tricky because it went from 5 years for the first offense and 10 years for subsequent offenses when you truly had what was called a true prior, where they were convicted of the offense, the prior offense, before commission of the current offense. That's what used to be defined as a prior. And in 2005, the legislature changed those definitions. And now what we used to think of as a true prior is known as a previous. And a prior is now something that makes a lifetime subsequent release, lifetime conditional release eligible when they have 2 offenses for CSC that are being sentenced at the same time. When they have a current CSC offense with a date of August 1st of 2025, and the prior disposition date is September 1st of 2025, that still makes it lifetime conditional release, because the idea for that is, was there a conviction prior to the conviction on the current offense? And so that can change things a little bit with conditional release, but I want to tell you that I am kind of, skating through these really fast, and our lunch and learn in early 2026 will cover modifiers in depth. And that includes conditional release, because when we say modification, it's something that modifies the sentence. That's what we're looking for here. You do get this message if you tried to proceed on from an offense that requires conditional release and one was not added. Unlike the weapon offense that doesn't allow you to proceed, this will allow you to move forward without entering that conditional release. But I think you'll know what happens if you do that, you're going to get that worksheet back. So make certain to apply conditional release when appropriate. Please remember that if you have any questions as I'm going through this, as it relates to the policy, not necessarily the worksheet part, please don't hesitate to unmute and ask away. Those modifiers that are populated once you push complete and then it populates the modifiers. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but just remember that you can't just put the statute on the additional statute line, or even if you were to add it to the penalty statute, it's not going to change the sentence until you physically add that modifier related to the specific statute. So that first one that you see there, 152.021, 3 parens C, that is the first degree drug penalty statute that you get flagged for on the offense page, that you would want to add this modifier if that was the penalty statute. And that's really an important thing to note, because if that is missed, the court should not sentence below the presumptive sentence. So for a first degree controlled substance under this statute with no criminal history score, the sentence is 65 months. The lower end of the range then also is 65 months. So with this modifier, the lower range cannot be less than the presumptive sentence from the grid cell. Failure to register is one. Before you add that, make certain that you have that statute cited. So this is not like the ones on the right side, like the drug and the DWI and the burglary. Those don't need a specific statutory citation to add those modifiers. A subsequent drug is a first or second degree drug with a prior first or second degree drug conviction, regardless of the penalty statute that is charged out. That's not true for failure to register. So watch out for that statute if you're trying to add that subsequent failure to register modifier. It will let you add it, but it will be sent back to you looking for that citation or that notation that it was in fact treated by the court as a subsequent failure to register. Again, the ones on the right side are the ones that are going to have some effect on the sentence, but they are added by you based on the information of both the current offense and their criminal history. You make that decision about whether that modifier gets added. So now we're past the offense, the current offense, and we're going to get into criminal history. So this is where that 2019 manual becomes really important if your offense date is before then. Otherwise, you just stick to the manual that you have for the date of the current offense. But remember, when we're using criminal history, we're including everything that received an imposed sentence or stay of imposition prior to sentencing on the current offense. So don't let the offense date of the prior play any part in this. Here we're just looking for that sentencing date. Two options that you have, and I highly suggest you use the first one always, and that's copy priors from prior worksheets. Even if they don't have one in there, it's the best thing to do, because once you start trying to add priors manually, you lose that option. And you will be able to copy priors from prior worksheets all the way back to 2000 when this system went online, when worksheets went online. So they're all in there available for you to pull in if they're necessary. So when you do copy priors from prior worksheets, it opens up this new screen, search prior worksheets. I would recommend leaving just the first name and the last name in there. Not even the birth date, no middle name, no SID number. The less information you put in, the wider the search parameter. So when you click on search, it's going to give you the list of cases that you can pull the worksheet from, and you just click that and it automatically populates those. And again, I wish I could show you that, but if you'd like to see that offline, we can certainly do a demonstration of that when we're not recording. So it's going to pull back in the offenses from the prior worksheet. It's not going to copy in juvenile priors if the defendant is now 25 or older, because those are just not eligible. So the system knows not to pull those in. But if it does, it's going to pull them in, and you're going to need to verify that those priors are still eligible based on the policies. So the defendant was under 25 when the current offense occurs. That's the only way that they can be pulled in. The juvenile priors are felony level offenses committed on or after their 14th birthday and were adjudicated delinquent in juvenile court. And it's going to take 2 of those priors to make 1 point, which isn't the maximum in most cases. And I am going to stop there because we have some changes that if they go through, it's going to change a lot of how subsequent history is calculated for juveniles. So we're just going to put it this way. If your defendant has a lot of juvenile priors and you're unsure if between now and July 31st of 2026, that person might be eligible for a second point, give us a call. And let's talk through it, because we don't want to lose the ability to make that first point, which you have to do before you can even think about the second point. So again, under 25, current offense, over 14 for felonies adjudicated delinquent in juvenile court. 2 of them to make 1 point. Misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors are also going to pop up. And here's the first time you're going to have the option to answer the custody eligibility question. So if custody was added, this is where the questions start popping up in the misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor priors and in the felonies. And they will all come in as no's that you have to then change to yeses. So here we're going to just put in our eligible targeted misdemeanors, our non-traffic gross misdemeanors sentenced to a gross misdemeanor sentence, and felonies sentenced to less than a year and a day. Or now felony sentenced to less than a year, depending on the date of the sentence. The priors are going to be good for 10 years. You see that statement, this prior offense will decay. That it's in green, but this prior offense will decay means it's still good. This prior offense has decayed means it's bad, and you will have to remove it from criminal history. So it does give you a little bit of help. The expiration date here is not required, only the disposition date, because these offenses are 10 years from the disposition date to the date the current offense occurs. And each prior is worth 1 unit, and it takes 4 units to make a point, which again, I'm going to say is the maximum in most cases. Unless your current offense is a felony DWI or a felony criminal vehicular operation or homicide. Things can be a little different. You get 2 units for eligible priors. It's a lot. So again, like with the juveniles, we say if that is your current offense, a felony DWI or a felony CBO, CBH, and you're unclear about the priors that they have and how they go into making the criminal history, you can give us a call, and you can also tune in January when we do misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor history, and the remaining parts of criminal history for our Lunch and Learn webinar. Again, this is where you would also mark that custody question as yes or no. Felony priors, we have a lot to include when we do felony priors, which is why using the copy priors from prior worksheet system is super helpful, because at least the data entry is not required for you anymore. But here you're going to include all Minnesota and eligible non-Minnesota felony priors that got the appropriate felony level sentence or received a felony stay of imposition or EJJ. Out-of-state priors will be included in January's, and it will probably make up a majority of January's Lunch and Learn. So I hope you'll mark that date, because I think it's going to be a good webinar for learning. But once you've decided it's eligible, then you just put it in there on the description line and select the severity level. If the prior offense was a federal offense and it's not going to have a Minnesota equivalent, when you select federal, the severity level will not be required, and you can select no Minnesota equivalent, which will default to 1 point under the policy. The next question that pops up is a prison question. Did this person go to prison? And that is the question that's important, because that determines how the offense will decay. So if it was yes for prison, you can see that it will decay off of the expiration date. So it's 15 years from the expiration date of the prior sentence, which includes everything: the term of imprisonment, the supervised release period, and any conditional release period. As soon as they're done with their prison, with their full sentence, that's the expiration date, and that we add on 15 years to. But if it's a state sentence, so we say no to prison, it's a state sentence, that means it was originally disposed of as a stay, and it remained a stay. Now, it could have changed from a stay of imposition to a stay of execution, but that's still an original disposition of a stay. So we use that original sentencing date, disposition date, plus 15 years for those to decay. If you have a stay of adjudication that gets revoked and receives a stay of imposition or a stay of execution, that's the new date, is when it was revoked and they got that new sentence. So that would be the date you would use in those situations, and then plus 15 years for the decay. The next question you can see under prison is that custody question. And here's where it makes a difference between a half a point and a full point, is when you answer this question based on the severity level of the offense they're on custody for. But more importantly, well, as important as assigning the point, I'll say it that way, is the fact that while an offense is under custody, there will not be any decay. So as long as that's a yes, there will not be a decay. If they come back later and that changes to no, then the decay will point to either the disposition or the expiration date, whichever is appropriate. That's why it's really important to answer these questions, because for felonies still under custody, there is no decay. And additionally, for felonies, there might be what we call the waiver ineligibility. If the current offense that they're being sentenced on, or the prior offense that they're on custody for, is an ineligible for waiver offense, that needs to be indicated here, because then that will tell the court that there is no waiver eligibility, and doing so will be a departure. So these are the offenses under that custody status ineligibility that if you select a severity level that aligns with one of those, that box will be clicked, but you will want to click the severe violent offense or that flee peace officer great bodily harm. That's a severity level 6 offense, and it was one that the commission added to this list of ineligible for waiver. There's another button up, there's another marking on here that's not showing up, and that is by the points. If we had inadvertently changed those points for the severity level 8 to be 1 point, there would be a message that said, points are not correct based on the severity level assigned, which tells you either the severity level needs to be fixed or the points need to be changed. So again, I can't emphasize enough how we have these stopgap measures in here to help keep your worksheet moving forward through the review system, the review scenario. And when those are missed, that's what it gets set back for. And that's not good, because some of these are so simple. And when they get missed, I'm going to be honest with you, it gets very frustrating for us, because it's a message that says something is wrong and it is ignored. For the most part, that's kind of how it feels when you go ahead and submit a worksheet with those red messages just there with no explanation. So that would be what a potential message might be here if the severity level and the points did not align. We're on now the end of the total points presumptive sentence. Now, I recognize that we've been looking at sort of pulled out sections of this instead of the full worksheet page on the system, but it's just with everything that we want to cover, it's easier to block it out this way. So when you get to the total points presumptive sentence screen, that's where it's going to show what the custody status point is and the juvenile and misdemeanor points. Those are populated based on the information you entered, as is the felony points. But the juvenile point or the misdemeanor point can be manually changed from this spot if it's appropriate. But since it's usually not appropriate, what is entered in there is probably correct in most. I'm just going to say is correct. I'll be definitive here. But the custody status point, do you see that message down there? You assigned a custody, but there was no prior indicating what they were under custody for. And then it tells you what to do. Please add a comment what custody is for and continue, or go back and select the prior and answer yes to the question, was this defendant under eligible custody? while they have the statement, add a comment and continue, I want to make certain we understand when a comment is okay and when a comment is not enough. A comment, when this pops up, is okay because the half-point custody is okay if it's an enhanced offense, a misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor prior used to enhance the current offense. That would not also be included in criminal history. So that would be a reason why you could have a comment on here that said custody is for case XYZ that was used to enhance the current offense. Awesome. A felony that gets used to enhance, this would be incorrect because felonies used to enhance are never removed from criminal history, so you would have a prior to check. The other way that this can be okay is to leave that half point on, maybe, is if you have release pending sentencing, stay of adjudication custody, or confined as the custody status, and the pending sentence prior has not been has not been sentenced yet, or the stay of adjudication prior has not been revoked, or they are confined for an offense that was used to enhance or has not been sentenced yet. Those are the times that you may have to use that check to override custody status point to 1, and then include a comment. Release pending sentencing was selected because XYZ 1 point, or the stay of adjudication, or why they were confined. But you would be, I hope you would be stunned when I told you that at least 2 out of every 20 worksheets, and that might not seem like a lot, but there should be 0 out of 20, every 20 worksheets we look at that leave that comment on there without any justification for it that is legitimate, i.e., it was an enhancing offense, or it was an offense they're on custody for that they haven't received a sentence on yet, and it wasn't worth a full point. It's exasperating to have worksheets submitted with that comment, with that error message. It is an error message. And I don't mean to belabor the point, but it's frustrating, and I think that's coming through. So I'm just going to say, when you see that, it needs to trigger something in your brain to do something. The presumptive sentence does get calculated for you, as does the presumptive sentence length. Stay length will also go on there for what is appropriate. And that presumptive sentence is going to depend on making certain the severity level entered was correct, the priors entered were correct, and no modifiers are missing. That's all the indication of what the calculator rather should look at to make the presumptive sentence. Over on the left side, we've got a couple of boxes. The top 2 are 100% necessary when relevant. If the court opts to waive the custody status, you can see how that's not grayed out. If you look at the one by presumptive consecutive, that box is grayed out. When that court waived custody status box is not grayed out, that means it's eligible. And what you want to do is leave the custody status type on, but click that box. And what it will do is it will recalculate the sentence without that custody point, but it will still allow us to capture the data of what statuses are being most waived, and that's important. If it is something pops up, and then there's the two other boxes, departure anticipated and revoked EJJ. Those simply print on the worksheet. They are helpful, but if they're not caught, that is okay. Don't go in and modify a worksheet just to add departure anticipated. That's okay. Try, though, to remember the revoked EJJ. That's helpful for us. We get a lot of data requests related to EJJ offenses, and it is very hard for us to tell. So checking that revoked is really helpful, especially when the person is between the ages of 18 and 21. They could get their EJJ revoked and they would appear as an adult to us. So that's really helpful. So let's talk about the and life sentence. I think we all know that that's related to murder. So if you have that, it's easy. You just check that box and it opens up another window for you to add the term of imprisonment or the no release options. Okay, back over to the presumptive sentence. We see two override options. We see an override under the presumptive sentence and an override under the probation cap. An override on the presumptive sentence should not be used unless all other options have been exhausted. You have remembered to put in the modifiers. You have remembered to calculate the custody correct. All of those things. There are times when a sentence at a specific severity level may need to use the override button because within that severity level will be offenses that have a statutory max that is less than what is shown on the grid. But because it's less common than the other offenses at that severity level, we offer that override button as a means to go in. And that's really important with attempted first-degree murder, actually, is to ensure that that override does not exceed, or the sentence does not exceed 240 months. We would then, in that situation, use the override button. An assault committed in prison, maybe they commit an assault in the fourth degree rather, severity level 1, and their criminal history score puts them in the stage section, but the court has decided to sentence presumptive consecutive because that will be the longer sentence. In that situation, we could use the override button to change the disposition from a stay to a commit, because all assaults committed in prison are automatic commits. So even though the grid shows a stay, we could change it to a commit, which would make available then the presumptive consecutive box. But don't use the override button because, well, the prosecutor said they're not sentencing with regard to 60911, or the prosecutor wants the worksheet to match the plea agreement. Nope. Override button is strictly to change the presumptive sentence under the guidelines that is for whatever reason not calculating appropriately. And the same thing is true with the probation cap. The way that the probation works now is if the statutory maximum is greater than 5 years, then 5 years is the presumptive length of stay. This is a big thing in DWIs where the presumptive, the stat max is 84 months or 7 years, but they can only stay that sentence for 5 years. The other probation length cap is when the sentence is less than 4 years. So you have domestic assault by strangulation, interestingly enough, has a 36-month cap, so a 3-year stat max. in that situation, the override, excuse me, in that situation, the cap would be 4 years. So it's either the statutory maximum or 4 years, whichever is longer. The statutory maximum or 5 years, whichever is shorter. That override box can be used if it's not coming up correctly. This is something we manage behind the scenes here. And when something comes up that we've never seen before, sometimes you have to reach out and we have to fix it with the override button before we can fix it on a bigger stage with the system. So the override buttons on this should not be used without just verifying it. The override box over here for the custody, that's okay to use, provided that the offense that they were released pending sentencing for or confined pending sentencing hasn't yet been sentenced. If it's already been sentenced, that is still the correct custody, but then you can go in and mark the prior. So that would alleviate the need to use the override there. But the override here, you should be less interested in reaching that out to that box. Reach out to us instead of that box. And that's it. That does it. We have on our website available all the stuff that you would need to help you out with questions. But as you all know, we're here to help and are super happy and willing to always answer your phone calls and emails. And so when you're working in the worksheet, take a second. If you have a question, take a second to stop and ask that question. And maybe a phone call is the fastest if we're available, but it's better than having it sent back. And when you see those error messages, pay attention to them because they're not always necessary to be ignored. You can ignore the severe violent offense modifier if it's not applicable. Really can't avoid or ignore the custody status hasn't been done. So that's it.